Okay, when you're painting with watercolor, these are all the items you want to have when you get set up to start painting. Obviously you're going to want your set of watercolor paints. They should have two brushes, one larger brush and one small brush in the set. If not, I'll have some extra on hand. When you're done, you want to make sure that the brushes get put back in the set. You can just place them right in here. You're also going to want a palette, a separate palette for doing your mixing on. Don't use the lid. You might find a lid that looks like it's had some, somebody's done some color mixing in there. That could also just be because when the lid was closed and this maybe got moved around, some paint dripped into there, but don't use the lid. It's designed for that, but it just makes a big mess when you close it up. You have to clean it off before you close it up, and then all that paint runs into these paints. So it's just better to use a separate palette. You're going to want a cup of water, which these are located in the cupboards above the sinks. You know, fill it 3/4 full. Please don't fill it all the way to the top. You run a risk of spilling it. You're going to want some paper towel, and then obviously some paper for whatever you're painting on, or your scrap paper for testing out colors. Yeah, you're always going to want some scrap paper. I'll have some scraps cut up so that you can always test out a color before you paint it, put the paint on your painting. The first thing you're going to want to do when you get your paints, especially second period, the first studio art class of the day, the paints are going to be pretty dry. I've already added some water to these paints. What you're going to want to do is just, like I said, add water to the paints. These are dry. These are what are called, these paints, this type of paint are called cakes. This is the form, one form that watercolor paints come in. They also come in tubes. I use the tubes for my painting class, but for studio art we just use the cakes. But they're hardened, so you got to soften them up. If you're in a class that's later in the day, somebody else has already used them, they might already be soft, they might already be moistened, so you might be okay. But if you get a set that hasn't already been used, the first thing you want to do is just dip your brush in your water and then touch it down into the paints, and it will just transfer some water to that. That's all you have to do, to put some water in there, and then you just got to let it soak a little bit and start to soften up the cake so that you can use the paints. When you're mixing paints, one thing you don't want to paint right out of the cakes. You always want to take your paint, add it to your palette, and then add water to it. The paints are meant to be they're a transparent medium. They're not going to be thick and opaque like tempera paints or acrylic paints or oil paint or anything like that. They're a transparent medium. You notice there's no white in the set. I also have taken all the black paint out of the sets. I've substituted them with either a magenta or a different type of blue. You might notice there's two different types of blues in some of the sets. I can't fit always. There's like 9 different colors that I have, and there's only 8 in this, so you might have to switch out. There's no brown in this set right here. I have 2 blues, and I basically have 2 reds. I have a regular red, like a barn red, and then a magenta, and then purple, the 2 different blues, green, yellow, orange. So if you need a brown, you might have to switch out one of these paints. And while I'm talking about it, how do you I'll take a set that's already dry. You have to be careful if your paints are wet when you want to pull some paints out. But basically this part here snaps out. You just have to kind of pull this forward like that, let it pop out. And you have to be careful when you do that if these are all wet, because that jerking motion of that snapping can cause that paint to come flying out. So make sure you're not right over your painting. Make sure you're not holding it close to your shirt. Hold it in a safe area away from yourself and away from your painting. Okay, so then you lift that out, and then you're just going to pop out these paints from the back side. You can just keep it upright and just push on the back side with your finger to pop that out. And again, be careful that things don't go flying. So, you know, hold your hand over it so that you can stop it from popping out and then you just pull that out. I'm just pushing through with my finger from the underside. Come see me if you need a new cake, like if it runs out, or you need to switch colors. You don't have a brown, or you want a magenta, you don't have a magenta, or you want one of the other blues or something like that. And then you just simply take the new one, snap it back into that, put it back in the tray, snap that back in. You're going to notice which way does it go. The round, there's a round corner and then there's a square corner. The round corners go into the round corners. Okay, snap that in. Alright, so like I started to say, when you're mixing your paints, once they're softened, you take that paint, you put it into the palette. You can use these smaller ones, bigger ones, depending on how big of a mixture that you need for how big of an area that you're painting. And you just dip your brush in your water, and it basically, every time you dip it in the water, I don't know if that's on the camera, you dip it into the water, it loads up with water, and then when you press it down in here, that water transfers and adds water to it. Okay, so you just keep dipping back and forth to keep adding more and more water. And then you'll adjust the strength of your, or the intensity of your paint, or decreases or affect its intensity and value by how much water you add to it. Like I was saying before, there's no white in these sets. We don't make the paints lighter by adding white. We just simply add more water, and then the white of the paper makes it look lighter. So you can see here's a nice light wash. If I just took some paint right out of there without adding much water to it, you can see I get a darker value. So you get lighter values, or you get tints by adding more water, less water for darker values. And that's pretty much it for setup of the paint. Just be careful when you're mixing paints that you wash out your brush in between. Say I wanted to add some yellow to my blue. I want to make sure I wash all the blue out of my brush before I add it to that, so I don't contaminate the yellow. If I wanted to get some more yellow, I don't want to just put my brush back in there. I'll just show you how I end up putting green into there. Now you might get a set that's already contaminated. Okay, like this set here, looks like somebody got some red into it. Some people aren't always as cautious, okay, and careful to make sure. Now you can simply clean those up. Once you get the paints wet, you just clean out your brush and you can put it in there and you swirl it around a little bit. Do that a couple of times. It'll clean that right out. So it doesn't take much, so don't avoid that set just because it looks a little contaminated. Not all the sets are going to look pretty. You're going to get some sets that are, have more paint in them than others. This one's a pretty full set. This one's not completely full, but there's still a lot of red left in this. So I wouldn't toss that. You want it to get completely empty before you switch it out. Even this yellow right here, I can still get quite a bit of yellow out of there. We want to use all of that paint up before we toss it out and get a new one. Okay, we don't want to waste paint. So that's why. So come see me if you need new paints. Okay, and then left for cleanup, what we want to do when we clean up is take this. You shouldn't really have to do anything to your paint set. If you've contaminated some of your colors, cleaned it up for the next person. But you're going to take your palette over to the sink, run it under the water. You just have to be careful when you run it under the water that you don't turn the water on too fast, because everything will splash off of here onto you. You want to maybe tilt it away from you, in fact, when you put it under the water, so that if it does splash a little bit, it's going to splash away from you. Take your brush with you, because that is also helpful for just kind of scrubbing it clean, letting the water. Water will get rid of most of it, but sometimes it gets built up in these corners, and you just have to get in there with your brush. And then when you're all done running it under the water, take your paper towel and just wipe it dry before you turn it back in. And then just make sure your brushes go back in the set, close it up, and you're all set.